Now, let me take you back to the moments I spent with Timothy. Don't worry, I'll tell you more about the Qwest family in due time. But for now, let's focus on the story of a mother's prayer. After living in the void for 16 long, dark years, Timothy and I had begun to carve out lives for ourselves in the only way we knew how, by building new habits and routines. It was our way of surviving, our way of continuing on despite everything that had happened. Timothy, much like his mother had done before him, would spend most of his days cleaning, making sure everything was spotless and in order. It was as if some part of him needed to ensure that everything around him was perfect, as though that could somehow make sense of the mess that had been his life. And then, there was the staring, endless hours spent gazing out the window, as if waiting for something, someone, to appear. I never fully understood it, but I didn't ask either. Some things are left unspoken. As for me, I developed a strange obsession with human food. It didn't make sense. Not really. After all, I couldn't taste it, couldn't even truly eat it. But there was something comforting about the idea of food, the textures, the colors, the way people gathered around it. It was like a puzzle I could never quite solve, but I couldn't help but be drawn to it. It became a way to feel human, even if I wasn't entirely sure what being human meant anymore. But despite my fixation on food, I wasn't as preoccupied with it as I was with Timothy. I could see it in his eyes, the emptiness that lingered even after all this time. He had been trying so hard to move past the shadow of his mother, but I knew he was still caught in it. I could see it in the way he lingered by the window, his eyes glazed over, as if searching for something that wasn't there. I walked over to him one day, dressed in my usual attire with a green robe, the clothes that had become as much a part of me as the silence between us. I stopped a few feet away from him, keeping my distance, just enough to give him space, but not too far to make him feel alone. In a sharp voice, one that held the weight of years of unspoken things, I asked, "I hope you're not planning to kill yourself again, Timothy. You know if you die, I die now." He didn't even flinch. His eyes remained fixed on the world outside, but I could see the flicker of something deep within him. Something fragile. He rolled his eyes, like he always did when I confronted him about things like this, and he let out a soft sigh, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he was still trapped in the haze of sleep. "I'm not planning to kill myself," he muttered, his words sluggish, like they had to claw their way out of his throat. "But there has to be something more than just this, you know." His words hung in the air between us, thick with uncertainty and longing. I could hear the weariness in his voice, the way it cracked with the weight of his thoughts. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He wasn't even really asking for help. He was simply stating the obvious, that something was missing from his life. Something he couldn't put into words, something that had been gnawing at him for years. I looked at him, studying his face, trying to understand what it was that he was really searching for. I understood the desire for more. After all, I had lived in the void for so long, watching time pass without me, without purpose. But for Timothy, it was different. He wasn't just looking for meaning. He was looking for a way to break free from the endless cycle that had held him captive for so long. The silence stretched out between us, as we both stared out that window, but neither of us spoke. His gaze was fixed, distant, as though he were waiting for something or someone to come and rescue him. But I knew, deep down, that no one was coming. Not in the way he wanted. Not in the way he needed. And yet, I couldn't help but wish I could offer him something, anything, to fill the void that still gnawed at his soul. But for now, we were left with nothing more than the quiet hum of existence, supernatural longevity, yes, but still caught in a world that seemed to offer little more than shadows and unanswered questions. Timothy sank back into the plush cushions of the sofa, his body slouching slightly as his fingers idly traced the edge of a coffee table. The weight of the idea had clearly found its way into his mind, and I could see it in the way his eyes flickered with contemplation, his lips slightly pursed. "What if we could help people?" he mused aloud, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that mirrored the depth of the thought. There was something different in the way he said it, a tinge of sincerity, maybe even a glimmer of hope, but it felt heavy, like a question that held more than just an answer. It was a burden, one he hadn't fully understood yet. I paused, unsure if this was the right moment to share the truth. The weight of the divine calling that rested on his shoulders was not a light matter, and the thought of burdening him with the immense responsibility of listening to the prayers of humanity, A constant stream of emotion, pain, and longing felt daunting. Could he bear it all at once? Could anyone? His journey had already been fraught with enough inner turmoil. Adding this divine obligation to his plate felt like a gamble, one that could break him or make him. Drawing a slow, steadying breath, I finally spoke, my voice steady but laced with a gravity I couldn't ignore. As the God of man, you do have responsibilities. One of the foremost is to listen to the prayers of humans. My words landed between us like a stone sinking into a still pond. Timothy didn't flinch, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his brows furrowed slightly as he absorbed the weight of what I had just said. He didn't answer immediately, and I could feel the hesitation in the air as it thickened around us. Then, with a sigh, he rose from the couch, stretching his limbs as though shrugging off something heavier than just fatigue. He stifled a yawn, a dismissive gesture that burned beneath my skin, sending a rush of frustration to the surface of my calm. I had hoped for more from him, not just the usual indifference. "No one wants to do that," he replied, his voice tinged with the weariness of someone who had long stopped trying to understand the gravity of his position. He turned his eyes back to the window, the same distant gaze that he always wore when trying to escape from the weight of reality. I rolled my eyes, the familiar response stoking the fire of irritation that was always simmering just beneath the surface. "Timothy," I began, my voice firm now, unyielding, "these are your responsibilities. They are part of who you are now. You cannot turn away from them. You don't have that luxury anymore." He didn't immediately respond, instead turning his back to me, moving toward the bedroom with slow, deliberate steps. It was as if he was trying to walk away from the conversation itself, as though retreating into the familiar comfort of isolation would somehow make it all go away. I could feel my frustration building, my patience waning, but I kept my voice steady, calling after him. "Timothy, I know you can hear me," I said, my tone more insistent now. He paused, his hand resting on the doorframe as he turned back toward me. His face was an emotionless mask, a blank canvas, as though all expression had been wiped away in his struggle to internalize everything he had become. He didn't say anything at first, his eyes empty of the hope he had only moments ago suggested. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence between us thick and almost unbearable. Then, with a small, reluctant sigh, he conceded. "Fine," he muttered, the word coming out as if it cost him more than he was willing to admit. He turned back to face me and walked back toward the living room with slow, almost apathetic steps. "I'll do it," he added, his voice flat but carrying the weight of reluctant acceptance. "I'll do it because you've helped me a lot. But don't expect me to do it with any enthusiasm." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, feeling a flicker of hope stir within me at his willingness to at least try. Gently, I reached out and smacked his shoulder with a soft, encouraging tap, more of a gesture than anything else, but one that I hoped would communicate the gravity of what lay ahead for him. The weight of his new role, the tasks he needed to embrace, all of it. "All right," I said, standing tall as I outlined everything for him. The prayers, the cries, the emotions of humanity would come to him in waves, like an ocean crashing relentlessly against the shore. He needed to listen, absorb, and offer what little solace he could. This was his new duty, his responsibility as a god. The quiet storm would not relent, and neither could he. Timothy, still reluctant but determined in his way, settled down onto the floor in front of me. He crossed his legs in a meditative pose, his body sinking into the stillness of the room as he closed his eyes. There was a subtle shift in the air around him, a quiet anticipation hanging like a veil over the space. The darkness seemed to grow heavier, as if it were pressing in from all sides, closing in on him, cocooning him in its depths. "Focus," I instructed softly, my voice calm yet firm, guiding him toward the center of the storm. I watched intently as his breath evened out, his features softening as he sank deeper into concentration. The world around him faded, the reality of the room dissipating as he began his journey inward, ready to open himself to the vast, unending chorus that awaited him. And then it began. The cacophony of voices, the swell of human emotion, flooded into his consciousness like an unstoppable tide. It started faintly, whispers, distant cries, fragmented voices from the far reaches of the world. But soon, it grew louder, more insistent. Cries of despair, the anguish of those lost in pain, mingled with bursts of laughter, the joy of fleeting moments. Anger, bitterness, love, humanity's deepest desires, its rawest feelings, all crashing together like thunder, relentless and unforgiving. Timothy's face twitched slightly, but he didn't break his concentration. Despite the overwhelming force of the voices, he maintained an unexpected calm, an inner stillness that was rare to see. It was as if, despite the flood of emotions threatening to drown him, he found a way to steady himself, to anchor his soul amidst the storm. It struck me then, in that quiet moment, just how powerful the human spirit could be. Even in its darkest moments, even when faced with the crushing weight of existence, the human soul could endure. And Timothy, immortal, divine, was the one who had to bear this burden. The burden of humanity's collective prayer. As Timothy made his way through the thick shroud of darkness, his feet guided by instinct rather than sight, a heart-wrenching sight caught his attention, something so raw and painful it made his chest tighten. In the distance, he spotted the silhouette of a woman, her form standing motionless under the pale glow of the moon, as though suspended between the earth and the heavens. Her body trembled with quiet sobs, her hands pressed against her chest in an almost protective manner. She was alone, her face barely visible in the darkness, but there was no mistaking the depth of her grief. The place where she stood, the grave of her 12-year-old son, was a cruel testament to a life cut short by a moment of thoughtless recklessness. The accident had been caused by a group of teenagers who had let alcohol cloud their judgment, a tragic, preventable loss that had turned a carefree evening into an irreversible disaster. Timothy stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat, as the full weight of her sorrow seemed to press down on him like an invisible force. It was as though her grief were a physical presence, wrapping around him in a suffocating embrace, filling his senses until he could hardly breathe. The air itself felt thick, heavy with the scent of lost hope and the quiet despair that had claimed this woman's heart. He could almost feel the emptiness she carried, the space left behind in her life where her son should have been. He knew in that moment that this woman came here every day, returning to the grave that was both a marker of her loss and the only place where she could feel close to the son she had lost. Each visit, a new layer of pain would settle over her. Each step she took toward the grave an unspoken plea for answers, for solace, for a glimpse of the child who had been taken too soon. Timothy's heart twisted in sympathy, and as he looked at the woman, a strange sensation gripped him, an overwhelming conviction that the boy deserved more than this. He deserved another chance, another shot at life, free from the mistake that had stolen him away. It wasn't just about the woman's grief anymore. It was about righting a wrong, restoring balance in a world that had gone askew. There, in the shadows, Timothy felt an undeniable surge of purpose that coursed through him like electricity. He couldn't explain it, but he knew, deep in his bones, that something needed to change. Suddenly, as if driven by an unspoken force, Timothy turned to me, his eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in him before: purpose, unwavering determination, and a calmness that seemed out of place in the face of such chaos. "Eden, I want to help this woman," he declared, his voice steady, yet laden with a sense of newfound resolve. I was taken aback by the intensity in his gaze. I knew that look all too well. It was the same one he had worn in the past when his idealism collided with the harsh realities of our world. His heart, always too big for its own good, now seemed to be guiding him down a dangerous path. I sighed, my concern pressing down on me like a stone. "You're only able to hear them, not answer," I reminded him gently, but there was no mistaking the worry in my voice. Timothy, however, paid no heed to my words. With a swift, almost dismissive gesture, he rose from the ground, his face set in a determined expression. "Today we will," he said, the conviction in his voice startling. Without waiting for my response, he strode toward the bedroom with an urgency I couldn't ignore. His mind was already made up. He was not going to let the rules stop him this time. I blinked, my chest tightening as I processed his words. Part of me wondered if, in his desperation to help, Timothy had lost his grip on reality. The thought unsettled me, but there was something in the air now, a quiet insistence that felt almost otherworldly. A mix of worry and curiosity tugged at me, but I found myself following him despite the warning bells ringing in my mind. I caught up with him just as he reached the door, my voice coming out softer than I intended. "This is against the rules, Timothy," I said, my words heavy with the weight of past lessons learned. He paused, his hand resting on the doorknob, and glanced back at me with a furrowed brow. "But it won't hurt anyone, right?" he asked, his voice laced with a vulnerability I hadn't expected. "She lost her son," I cut him off sharply, the urgency of the situation making my heart race. I didn't need to hear any more. I could see the pain in his eyes, feel the weight of his words, but I also knew the consequences of what we were contemplating. "Timothy, we don't play with death," I insisted, my voice firm, though my heart trembled. I didn't need to say more, he knew exactly what I meant. But Timothy wasn't swayed. He rolled his eyes, clearly growing impatient with my concerns. "I have to help this woman," he repeated, a fierce edge to his tone. "Please, you don't even have to join me. Just show me the way." His plea hung in the air, suspended between us. It was filled with desperation, a hope so fierce it was almost impossible to ignore. There was something in the intensity of his gaze, the way his words echoed in the quiet of the room, that stirred something deep inside me. I had seen him struggle with loss before, had watched him try to make sense of a world that often felt cruel and unfair. But this was different. This was a moment where he was ready to bend the rules, to defy everything we had been taught, just to offer a glimmer of hope to someone who had lost everything. The air around us felt charged with possibility, and I couldn't help but feel that, for better or worse, this moment would change everything. Timothy was not just fighting for the woman's peace of mind. He was fighting for the chance to rewrite fate itself once more. He turned his gaze to the mirror, fixing his eyes on the reflection that seemed to hold echoes of memories long past. The silence between us deepened, and for a few lingering seconds, he stared as if searching for something, some thread of the past that remained elusive. His expression shifted subtly, eyes softening as if he were caught between longing and regret. Yet there was something in his posture, in the subtle tremor of his hand, that betrayed the weight of what he had lost. It was a vulnerability I hadn't seen in him before, one that made me realize how deeply he was hurting. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice tinged with sorrow, as though the words themselves were heavy with the weight of unspoken grief. "I know you don't understand what it's like to lose someone, Eden," he murmured, the pain in his voice almost tangible. "But it hurts so deeply to see that a smile is now just a memory, and laughter is merely a shadow of what once was. It used to fill my days, like sunlight pouring through a window, and now..." His voice trailed off, as though the reality of his own words was too much to bear. He stood there, distant, as if even the mirror could not provide him with the solace he sought. I straightened my posture, lifting my chin defiantly. The world had always seen me as someone unshakable, but Timothy didn't know the burdens I carried. He had no idea how deep my scars ran, how much of me had been ripped away, bit by bit. Anger surged within me, hot and fierce, an emotion I had kept tightly restrained for so long. I found my voice rising, sharp and unwavering, cutting through the air with a force that surprised even me. "I have lost a great deal." I spat, the words like daggers aimed straight at the heart of his sorrow. "I've lost my power, my respect, my honor, my godhood, and, most painfully, my brothers. They are gone. Forever. And you think you have the monopoly on grief." He was silent for a moment, his eyes widening as if the ferocity in my words had caught him off guard. But then, as if compelled by some invisible force, he turned to face me fully, his mouth opening as if to respond. But before he could form his thoughts into words, I pressed on, unable to hold back the tempest of emotions threatening to consume me. "It's hard to lose things you know you'll never see again," I continued, my voice shaking with the force of emotions I could no longer suppress. "But it's far more agonizing to lose things just out of your reach, things that still feel so close, like whispers in the dark, yet remain impossibly distant, like the stars. I can still hear their voices in my dreams, and that is what torments me the most." Timothy's lips curled into a slight smirk, though it was brief and fleeting, a subtle acknowledgement that he couldn't quite argue with my words. His expression shifted then, as though he was savoring the challenge of this conversation, the clash of our emotional turmoil. He took a deep breath and posed a question, his tone shifting from sorrow to something more contemplative, almost calculating. "What would you do if you had the power to bring your brothers back together?" The question landed like a stone, heavy and unrelenting, sinking into the very marrow of my bones. I felt its weight, the gravity of the possibility, settle over me. The world seemed to still in that moment, my gaze dropping to the ground as I searched for an answer that didn't yet exist. Could I even contemplate such a thing? Would it be worth the cost? The lengths I would have to go to? The rules I'd have to break? I had already danced with the edges of forbidden power, bending reality to my will in desperate, futile attempts to retrieve what I had lost. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in a slow, measured breath. When I opened them again, my gaze met his, a mixture of hope and sorrow stirring within me. I didn't want to say it, didn't want to voice the thought that had been lingering at the edge of my consciousness, but I knew it was true. The world of the dead was no simple place to traverse, no matter the strength of one's will. Reaching the world of the dead is no simple task, Timothy, I explained softly, my voice quieter now, almost reverent. It requires a battle of will, a strength that most cannot fathom. It's a treacherous game, a limbo where the temptation to falter is constant. It's a place that takes more than it gives. To my surprise, the faintest of smiles broke across his face, and before I could process it, he had leapt off the bed, a burst of energy and excitement radiating from him. He jumped up and down, his laughter a sharp contrast to the heavy mood that had settled over us only moments before. It was as if the very idea of defying death, of challenging its inevitability, ignited something within him, an exuberance, a zest for life that I had almost forgotten. I understood in that moment. I understood exactly why he was so determined, so eager. It wasn't just about bringing back what was lost. It was about defying the very thing that had taken it all away. He didn't want to possess the power of a god merely to let it fade into nothing. It was as though he were a man yearning for a home, yet forever locked out, never truly able to step inside. That frustration, that burning desire for something unattainable, was what drove him. I couldn't help but chuckle at the raw joy that now filled the room, a bittersweet laugh that held both amusement and something far darker beneath it. It was strange, this juxtaposition of such intensity with such childlike joy. But deep inside me, there was an unsettling awareness, a feeling that this newfound excitement was about to lead us both down a path from which there would be no return. We were about to confront death itself, the wise, eternal deity I had not laid eyes on in many long years. The mere thought of it sent a chill crawling up my spine. Facing him again was not just a matter of power or will, it was an emotional reckoning. For the last time I had seen death, I had been a being of light, radiant with purpose and power. But that had faded long ago, leaving only the ghost of who I once was. The thought of confronting death now, when I had become so different, so dimmed. It unsettled me deeply. Yet, despite my fear, I knew this journey was inevitable. I knew I had to face the god of the underworld once more, for Timothy's sake. His peace, his closure, depended on it. And perhaps, in confronting that deity, I would find the closure I so desperately needed as well. Timothy looked up at me, his eyes filled with expectation, a mixture of hope and trepidation swirling behind them. His brow furrowed slightly, and his voice trembled with uncertainty. Do I have to die to get there? His question hung in the air, raw and fragile, the weight of it pressing down on the space between us. His raised eyebrows only added to the vulnerability in his tone, as if he were unsure whether he was ready for what was to come. In response, I turned toward the mirror, a sudden shift in my body as if the reflection itself called to me. My feet moved slowly, deliberately, each step careful as if I were walking on hallowed ground. The floor beneath me seemed to fade, and all that remained was the gleaming surface of the mirror ahead. Reaching it, my fingers hovered above the glass for a brief moment before they made contact. When I touched the mirror, it felt different from any ordinary surface, smooth, cool, yet somehow alive. I let my fingers glide across it, moving as delicately as a painter's brush against a canvas. Each stroke sent a faint ripple through the surface, as if I were unlocking something deep within its depths. With each passing second, I felt myself dissolving into the mirror. The world around me blurred, and it was as if I was sinking into an ocean of reflections, my form becoming one with the mirrored surface, slipping away into its boundless depths. It was a strange sensation, a disorienting one, like becoming a part of something far greater than oneself, like a whisper in the wind or the sound of a forgotten song. I could feel the weight of time pressing against me, the gravity of countless lives unfolding in the spaces between breaths. Curious, Timothy trailed behind me, hesitant but eager to understand. He watched closely as I moved, unable to tear his gaze away from the surreal spectacle unfolding before him. When he peered into the mirror, what he saw wasn't his own reflection. Instead, there was a boy with tousled brown hair, his face familiar yet distant. The boy's movements mirrored Timothy's every gesture, hands reaching out, tilting his head, stepping forward. But it wasn't Timothy, not exactly. It was something deeper, something tied to the very core of his being. "What is this?" Timothy called out, his voice tinged with confusion, his words laced with wonder as he tried to comprehend what was happening. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing against the glass, but it remained cold and unyielding. I turned my gaze to him, my voice carrying in the stillness of the room, as if coming from everywhere at once, reverberating off the walls. "That is you in your past life. Humans die, Timothy. Their souls are reborn into new forms, sometimes as butterflies, sometimes as newborn infants, sometimes even as something else entirely. The cycle never truly ends." Timothy's eyes widened, and he glanced around the room, his gaze flickering with increasing confusion. He was trying to locate me, searching for the source of my voice, but the space between us seemed to stretch farther than before. "So, there is no hell," he ventured cautiously, as if testing the boundaries of what he could comprehend. I chuckled softly, the sound light but laced with an edge of melancholy. "I didn't say that, Timothy. There is indeed a hell, but you won't understand it until you see it for yourself." His curiosity seemed to deepen, and without hesitation, he extended his hand toward the boy trapped within the mirror's shimmering surface. As his fingers neared the glass, something unexpected happened. A strange, magnetic force seemed to pull him in, gently at first, but with increasing strength. The air around him thickened, and before he could react, he was falling. His feet left the ground, and he tumbled forward, his body weightless, the mirror's surface rippling like water beneath him. When he finally landed, it was not on the solid floor of the room, but instead on a glassy, smooth surface that felt both solid and surreal, as though it were not truly part of the world he knew. He stood up slowly, confusion clouding his thoughts, only to realize that he had entered a space far beyond what he could have ever imagined. Above him, the sky stretched infinitely, a vast and empty void. The horizon was nowhere to be seen, and the world felt like it was suspended in a state of perpetual twilight. Around him, fragmented pieces of mirror floated freely, each shard catching the dim light and reflecting strange, fragmented moments of life. He could see scenes, tiny slivers of existence, captured within the mirrored surfaces. Bees, their tiny wings beating furiously as they gathered nectar from vibrant flowers. A woman, bent over in tireless labor, her face a picture of exhaustion and determination as she worked through both day and night. Each shard held a story, a glimpse into lives that had come before and would continue long after, suspended in this strange dimension. Timothy moved deeper into this mirror world, his every step filled with an unspoken sense of awe and dread. The very air seemed to pulse with the weight of countless lives, joys, sorrows, triumphs, and failures, all swirling together in this uncharted space. As he ventured further, the reflections began to shift and warp, revealing things that no human eye had ever borne witness to. Beneath the glassy surface, he glimpsed dark, unfathomable creatures, beasts whose skin was as black as the abyss itself. Their eyes glinted with an unsettling light, their forms twisting in ways that defied comprehension. The very sight of them sent a chill through his spine, but there was something hypnotic about the way they moved, something that tugged at the edges of his consciousness. As he descended further into this mirrored abyss, he saw the remnants of once great civilizations. The grand fortresses of kings and emperors, majestic in their prime, now reduced to rubble, their crumbling stones drifting aimlessly like forgotten dreams. Entire empires had fallen, their glory lost to the sands of time. And then, in a moment that left him breathless, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks. There, suspended in the endless void of space, was Earth, his Earth, but battered and broken. It was no longer the vibrant, thriving planet he had known. Instead, it was a shattered orb, its surface scarred and torn, a mere collection of rubble floating in the black expanse. The familiar oceans were now dry, the continents barely recognizable. It was as if time itself had turned against the planet, unraveling it bit by bit until only fragments remained. Timothy's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the shattered earth, but the moment he touched it, the image faded, slipping away into the abyss. I approached him cautiously, my footsteps soft against the mirrored floor. My presence was heavy with an unbearable truth, one I had carried for too long. As I neared him, I met his gaze, and for the first time, I saw the raw confusion and fear in his eyes. He was no longer the boy who had asked naive questions. He was now a witness to something far darker, far more complex. "We don't yet understand how it happened," I whispered, my voice tinged with sorrow and regret. "My brothers and I have always wondered." I let the weight of my words settle between us, as we both thought about the broken earth, a stark reminder of what had been lost. The truth was far more elusive than either of us had imagined, and perhaps it always would be. "When?" Timothy's voice cut through the air, sharp and strained, a raw edge of desperation lacing his words. The intensity of his question made my chest tighten, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. I glanced at him, but quickly looked away, unable to meet his eyes. I could see the hunger in his gaze, the need to understand, to grasp the truth, but I knew that this was not something he was truly ready to confront. Not yet. The truth was a grim, unshakable thing, one that had haunted me for far too long. The kind of truth that shattered illusions and left a mark deeper than any wound. And worse yet, the knowledge that it was humanity's insatiable greed, its lust for power and resources, that had brought about the devastation we now witnessed. The destruction had not come from some external force, some unforeseen disaster. No, it had been you. Our own hands had shaped the fall of the world. I swallowed, trying to find the words, but they felt heavy in my throat, almost too much to bear. Finally, I spoke, my voice barely a whisper. 2050, I said, the number hanging in the air like a death sentence. It was a future I had hoped never to see, a time I had feared more than anything. But now it was reality, an inevitability I could not deny. Timothy's brow furrowed in confusion, his eyes searching my face as if expecting me to take it back, to tell him it wasn't true, that it hadn't happened. But there was no going back. There was no hiding from the what is, no escape from the truth. I saw the flicker of disbelief in his gaze before it hardened, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't a child anymore. His defiance, his assertion, "I'm not a kid, Eden," carried a weight of its own, as if he were trying to will himself into something greater than the boy I had once known. He wasn't ready, but he was demanding the truth now, whether it shattered him or not. I forced a smile, one that was more for him than for myself, one that masked the sorrow that had become my constant companion. I could feel the truth of it in my bones, a gnawing ache that had never quite left. I took a steadying breath and began walking again, my steps echoing softly in the mirrored space around us. Timothy, still reeling from the weight of what I had just said, followed close behind, the reflections around us pulling at him like a magnet. The landscape around us shifted and shimmered, reflections of countless lives spinning in every direction. There were beings unlike anything he could have ever imagined, creatures whose forms seemed to bend and change with every heartbeat, worlds that existed beyond the limits of what he had once known. He couldn't tear his eyes away, and I could see the fascination growing within him, the wonder building as he caught glimpses of lives and landscapes he had only ever dared to dream of. "What is this?" he exclaimed, his voice full of awe, the excitement practically vibrating through his words as he spun around, taking it all in. I paused, allowing him a moment to absorb the wonders around us before I answered, my voice calm and steady despite the swirling emotions inside. "This is the mirror world," I said, gesturing expansively, my hands sweeping through the space. "It's the boundary between everything you know and everything you don't, between your dreams and your reality, and the realms that exist beyond your own understanding." He looked around again, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion, the enormity of the place beginning to settle over him. The mirror world was a liminal space, a place where the rules of existence were bent and broken. It was a place where memories, desires, and the very fabric of time collided in ways that couldn't be explained by simple logic. It existed beyond comprehension, a reflection of every possibility and impossibility, where past, present, and future danced together in eternal uncertainty. "This place," I continued, my voice softening, "it holds the essence of every life that ever was, every moment that ever happened. And those who journey here, they walk between realities, caught between what was and what could be. There's no beginning, no end, only what is. Timothy's gaze lingered on the reflections that swirled around us. Each one seemed to hold a life of its own, a snapshot of something that had once been or could yet be. The lives were fleeting, each moment frozen in time but alive with possibility. A boy, laughing, running through a field of golden wheat. An artist painting, lost in the strokes of her brush. A family gathered around a table, sharing a quiet moment of happiness. The images were beautiful and tragic in their transience, reminding us both of the fragility of existence. I could see the effect this was having on Timothy. He was mesmerized by it all, by the beauty, by the terror, by the unknown. And I could feel his questions bubbling up, the need to understand, to process it all. But I knew that this was only the beginning. The path ahead was far darker, and the truth of what lay beyond these reflections was something he wasn't fully prepared for. Still, he was determined, and I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of pride and sorrow for him. He was no longer the naive boy who had stepped into this journey. He was becoming something else entirely, something more. Whether he was ready for it or not, he would have to confront the darkness that lay ahead, just as I had once done. And when the time came, when the mirror world had shown him all it could, there would be no turning back. We found ourselves standing on a shimmering glass pathway, its surface gleaming like liquid silver beneath our feet. The path stretched infinitely ahead, winding through a landscape unlike any we had ever seen, its ethereal glow casting long shadows in every direction. In front of us, stretching out across the horizon, lay the 9 realms, each one a distinct world, each one home to an entirely different breed of life. As we stood there, frozen by the sight before us, I could sense Timothy's awe mingling with unease. He had no idea yet just how deeply the complexity of these realms would resonate within him. The first realm that caught our gaze was hell, its very name evoking a visceral reaction in the pit of my stomach. It was not the inferno one might imagine from myth. This was a realm transformed, shaped by millennia of struggle and suffering. The sky above was a dull, smoky green, the land scarred with jagged mountains and rivers of molten rock. Below, the ground pulsed with an unsettling energy, as if the realm itself were alive, breathing with a hunger that could never be sated. Hell was a place of torment, but it was also a place of order. Its inhabitants, demons, ruled with brutal efficiency, each one bound by their nature and duty. The realm was a reflection of its denizens, fierce, unyielding, and eternally divided, ever-changing, and yet anchored in its primordial agony. Beside it, contrasting sharply, was the second realm, heaven. The very sight of it was a stark contrast to hell, bathed in pure, blinding light. The architecture there was grand, ethereal, and heavenly, with towering spires that seemed to reach up to infinity, their tips glowing like the sun itself. The ground shimmered with an otherworldly glow, and the air was thick with the scent of jasmine and the hum of eternal peace. This was no longer the realm of the divine creators and creators alone, though. In the wake of humanity's actions, it had become an unyielding sanctuary, a space where angels were segregated, each group relegated to its designated territories, a kingdom of divine order. Yet, like hell, this realm had been reshaped by history, an eternal battle, a conflict of celestial proportions that had cemented heaven as a place of divine separation and structure. Hell and heaven, though opposites, were two halves of a whole, interconnected and divided by nature's hand, each shaped by the revolutions that had twisted the worlds and forced their segregation. They no longer merely represented light and dark. They were histories, philosophies, and rebellions carved into the very fabric of the realms. No one dared to question their roles anymore, and perhaps that was their greatest tragedy, frozen in their own natures, forever defined by what they had once been. The third realm lay just beyond heaven, and its existence was veiled in darkness. Known only as the Void Place, this world was an enigma, a place of unimaginable mystery. The goddess of the void, whose name was whispered in the darkest corners of the cosmos, was said to rest her head here. The void was a vast, seemingly infinite blackness, a realm where nothing existed except for a profound silence that had long since devoured any traces of light. It was a space where gods feared to tread, where their power would be consumed and turned against them. Some said it was the birthplace of everything, the primordial soup from which existence had once emerged, but it had long since ceased to serve any purpose other than a reminder of the unknown, a realm where creation and destruction met and became one. The fourth realm, sitting just past the void, was the new world, a domain of unimaginable beauty and purpose. This was a divine creation, molded by the hands of the Creator and His Son. Here, paradise had been crafted with meticulous care, far more sacred than heaven itself, and more awe-inspiring than any earthbound dream. The land was lush with rolling white hills and crystal-clear rivers, with skies that shimmered in shades of sapphire and gold. Everything was in harmony here, the trees, the animals, the very essence of life itself. This world, more divine than any mortal could ever dream of, stood as a testament to what had been lost in the struggle for power and the subsequent fall of all the other realms. It was beauty beyond comprehension, untouched by conflict, a space where peace reigned and time seemed to have no dominion. Before us stood the fifth world, the Great Pill, an omniverse containing all that existed, all that ever had been, and all that ever would be. It was not a world in the conventional sense, but a nexus, a place that connected all realms, weaving them together in a pattern too intricate for any mortal to decipher. It was here that the very fabric of reality itself was stitched together, a nexus of creation that stood as the beating heart of all existence. The Great Pill was not just a realm, it was a bridge, the point at which all the divergent paths of the realms met and intertwined. It was where gods and mortals alike could glimpse the vastness of the universe and the complexity of all that existed. The sixth realm, known simply as nothingness, stood in stark contrast to the Great Pill. This was a forsaken domain, a place that had been abandoned by hope. It was said that in the farthest reaches of this desolate land, gods slumbered, lost to the depths of their own exhaustion and desires. Time had no meaning here. It was a place where the souls of gods who had exhausted themselves to the point of no return were sent to rest, or perhaps to never wake. It was a place of eternal sleep, but not the peaceful kind. Those who ventured too far into nothingness would find themselves caught in an eternal, blissful slumber, never again to wake from the dream. It was both punishment and refuge, a land of limbo that could trap even the most powerful beings, rendering them powerless and forgotten. Katapino, the seventh realm, was a place of curious origin. This world had been forged by beings who were untethered to the omniverse, creatures who had been swallowed by the serpent, an ancient and monstrous entity whose depths were said to hold unimaginable power. These beings built a home from the serpent's belly, and from its darkness, they crafted Katapino, an enigmatic world that defied understanding. The land of Katapino was jagged, ever-shifting, a place where the laws of physics were bent and broken. The sky constantly shifted colors, and the ground trembled with the energy of forgotten forces. It was a world of mystery, of dark wonder, and untold potential, a place where the boundaries of the known universe didn't exist, and where only the brave or the foolish dared to venture. The eighth realm was the one we sought, the abode of the deceased. This was the space where souls traveled after leaving the mortal realm, a transitional world that had been meticulously established by both heaven and hell. It was neither a paradise nor a place of torment, but a liminal space, a waiting room of sorts, where souls were either prepared for judgment or for reincarnation. The realm was a vast and complex landscape, filled with rivers of silver light, fields that stretched endlessly, and towering gates that led to different destinations. It was a world of reflection, where the deceased could come to terms with their past lives, review their choices, and await their next phase of existence. And finally, looming before us stood the ninth and final realm, Garbar's Gate. It was an imposing structure, a gateway that stretched into infinity, its walls adorned with symbols that no mortal could decipher. It was said that beyond Garbar's Gate lay the realm of omnipotence, a place that only the most powerful beings, those beyond gods, beyond angels, beyond any known entity, could ever enter. What lay beyond the gate was a mystery, for no one had ever ventured through it. Only whispers remained, legends passed down through generations, of a being of unimaginable power, the omnipotent God who stood beyond all that was and all that could be. We stood at the precipice of all these realms, gazing into the infinite possibilities of existence, each one a reflection of the forces that shaped it. Each realm was a world unto itself, and yet, together, they formed the delicate web that held the fabric of reality intact. We had come to this place, to this moment, to find what we sought. But the path ahead was uncertain, and I could feel the weight of the journey settling heavily on my shoulders. There was no turning back now. I gestured solemnly toward the mirror in the center of us, the Great Pill. My voice took on a weight that seemed to settle over the entire space, heavy with the gravity of what I was about to reveal. "That is where you will find your home," I said, my tone steady but infused with an unmistakable finality. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I shifted my hand to the final mirror on my right. Its surface was dark, a stark contrast to the pulsing vibrancy of the Great Pill. "And that's where your journey must end when you die," I continued, the words heavy with an unspoken understanding of the truth they carried. The mirror's reflection rippled, revealing a realm that felt impossibly distant and yet undeniably close. Its atmosphere was oppressive, a sense of doom hanging in the air like an inescapable fog. I could see the shape of it in the reflection, the land that awaited humans all in the end, the place where even the most powerful would eventually be drawn. Timothy's gaze fixed upon it, and his expression twisted with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. His brow furrowed as he studied the world beyond the portal, his eyes scanning the jagged landscape of despair. The sky above the realm was black, not the deep, comforting shade of night, but an endless, oppressive void that seemed to consume everything in its reach. The darkness wasn't merely a lack of light, it was as if light itself had been swallowed whole, leaving only a cold, suffocating emptiness. There was no sun, no stars, only the perpetual weight of shadow. The ground beneath the realm's bleak sky was a stark, unsettling sight. It seemed to be made entirely of ashes, grey and brittle, as if the land had been burned over and over, with no chance of ever healing. The ground felt like a graveyard, the very earth itself mourning what had once been, a perpetual reminder of the destruction that had followed. It was as though the ashes beneath their feet were the remnants of countless lives, the fallen humans who had once walked proudly upon this earth only to be reduced to dust. The weight of their loss hung thick in the air, an unspoken sorrow that seemed to linger in every particle of the ashen soil. Timothy took a step closer, his feet hesitant on the edge of the shimmering glass path. His eyes locked onto the desolate horizon beyond the mirror, and I could see the shiver of unease that ran through him. The land was not merely barren, it was devoid of hope. The colors that painted the world were not vibrant or alive but drained. Everything seemed to fall into a grayscale of perpetual twilight, as if the very spectrum of light had been forsaken. The world before us was a haunting vision, one that could not be touched by the living, its very nature an unsettling echo of the end of all things. The reflection flickered briefly, as though the mirror itself could not fully capture the depth of the place it showed. And I knew that what Timothy was seeing was only a fragment of the reality. This was not a world anyone could truly understand until they had crossed into it, until they had reached the end of their own journey. The scene was like an old film, stuck in a loop, a haunting memory that would never fade, always repeating in an eternal, unyielding cycle. "It's..." Timothy's voice faltered as he took in the full scope of what lay before him. He was struggling to process it, his eyes wide with a mixture of dread and disbelief. "It's like something out of a nightmare." I nodded slowly, my own gaze never leaving the mirror. "It's the place where the end comes for the living, Timothy. It's where every story ends, no matter how bright the beginning. The land of nothingness and everything all at once. The place where all mortals, and beings of every kind, must eventually surrender." My voice softened as I spoke the last part, knowing that this was a truth he was not yet ready to face, not truly. But it was a truth we could not escape. Here, there is no redemption, no return. Just the endless cycle of time grinding to a halt. The air around us grew still, as if the very essence of the place was pressing down on us, urging us to turn away, to leave the looming truth behind. But there was no turning back. This was where we were headed, where we had always been headed, whether we understood it fully or not. The end was inevitable. Timothy stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the reflection sinking deep into his chest. His eyes shifted away from the mirror to look at me, searching for something, anything, that might offer a glimmer of hope. But I knew there was nothing to offer him. In the end, all paths led here, to this ashen wasteland, to the land where even gods would fall for the dark game. As I stepped into the desolate expanse, Timothy Creed lingered just behind me, his eyes scanning the barren wasteland with a mix of wonder and unease. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, pressing against us with a heavy, suffocating quality. The land stretched out endlessly, a vast, grey sea of dust and ash. Above us, the sky hung like a thick, oppressive blanket of dark clouds, swirling in an unnatural pattern. Dominating the horizon was a massive, foreboding tower, its jagged silhouette cutting through the gloom like a dark wound in the sky. It seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality, its sheer scale making it impossible to comprehend. The ground beneath our feet was a uniform shade of dead grey, an ashen desert void of life, except for the faint glow of mysterious blue orbs scattered across the world. They shimmered softly, pulsating with an ethereal light from deep within the sand, their faint glow offering the only colour in the otherwise bleak world. Timothy glanced at me, his curiosity piqued as he stepped closer. "What are those blue things?" he asked, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. He tilted his head toward the glowing orbs, his gaze tracing their soft, hypnotic glow. I turned to meet his eyes, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. My words carried a gravity far beyond the ordinary. "Those," I said, my voice low, "are the spirits of all life, humans, animals, trees, and otherworldly beings alike." I paused, watching as he absorbed all of my words. "They are the remnants of existence, the echoes of every living thing that has ever walked." Timothy's brow furrowed, a frown forming as he glanced at the orbs once more. "And why are they just lying in the dust?" I inhaled deeply, the air thick with a sorrowful, almost mournful weight that seemed to seep into my very bones. "They linger here, waiting," I explained, my voice barely above a whisper, "in the hopes of being consumed by the beast or to find purpose once again." He paused, staring at the orbs in disbelief. "So that's how you gods handle our spirits?" he asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "You just let them waste away?" I could feel the sting of his words, but I simply nodded, my gaze drifting toward the towering structure ahead. "It's one of the processes. Every minute, over 1,000 souls filter into this place. Some are chosen, taken into the tower for reincarnation. Others, though, are left behind. Some remain here, forgotten, while others face a far darker fate, consumed by the very beast of the land itself." Timothy's gaze shifted, drawn irresistibly to the tower. "That's the Tower of Death, isn't it?" he said, the words slipping from his lips in a hushed, almost reverential tone. A small chuckle escaped me, involuntary. "No, it's not," I replied, my voice carrying a sense of quiet amusement. "Let me explain." I gestured toward the structure with a sweep of my arm, pointing to the imposing spire that stretched upward, its vertical lines sharp and unyielding. "It's called the Tower of Ra. It's made up of 3 distinct levels, each representing a different stage of existence. At the very top, there's the level of departed existence. Below that, the realm of knowledge. And beneath that, the land of the deceased." I pointed toward the swirling clouds that obscured the peak of the tower, a flicker of light visible through the darkness as if something stirred in the depths of the storm. Above, hidden from view, is where souls are conceptualized. This is where identities are crafted, where the very essence of a being is formed. The second level, knowledge, is where the wisdom of existence and the afterlife is kept. And below that, we find the realm of the departed, the domain of those who have passed. I paused, lowering my hand and feeling the weight of the land beneath our feet. "This," I said softly, "is the realm of the deceased." We continued walking, the ground beneath us growing even more oppressive as we neared the tower. It was as if the land itself was breathing, a quiet, mournful rhythm that echoed in the air. Strange, shadowy figures began to appear, emerging from the dust like specters. Men clad in tight, black bodysuits moved with eerie fluidity, their bodies bent low as they carefully gathered the small, glowing orbs from the ground. Their movements were precise, methodical, as if they were following some unseen directive. I felt Timothy's instinct to speak, but before he could voice his thoughts, I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling for him to remain silent. My eyes met his, my expression stern. A warning. I hoped he understood. With a subtle, silent gesture, I urged him to keep moving. But a sudden chill swept over Timothy, his body stiffening as an invisible pressure pressed against his neck. He felt it, something unseen and malevolent, lurking just beyond his vision. Despite my warning, his eyes darted to the right, and he froze. One of the cold, faceless figures had appeared at his side, its presence chilling. The being was too close, far too close, and before I could react, it reached out, pressing its finger gently against Timothy's skin. A primal surge of panic flooded my chest. "Timothy, don't look at them," I shouted, my voice sharp with urgency. "We don't have the same power here as we do on Earth." But it was too late. In that instant, the creature's face contorted, morphing into a grotesque mockery of Timothy's own. It was as if it was feeding off his essence, twisting his features into something unrecognizable. I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization of the danger we were in. Then, suddenly, a haunting whistle pierced the air. It was a sound so strange and unsettling that it seemed to reverberate in my very bones. The faceless creatures froze, their movements stilled. As if summoned by some unseen force, they turned in unison, their gaze now fixed on the looming tower. Like puppets on strings, they moved together, an eerie procession, walking in perfect harmony toward the structure, disappearing into the shadows. I turned my gaze back to the tower, my heart sinking. There, within the swirling darkness, stood the ancient god of the dead. His presence was overwhelming, a suffocating force that seemed to bend the very air around him. I recognized him immediately. Just as I remembered, his form was unmistakable. In his right hand, he gripped an oakwood cane, its surface worn and weathered by time. His skin was the deep, rich hue of bronze, etched with deep lines and wrinkles that told the stories of countless eons. It was as if the passage of time had etched its mark into his very being, leaving him both timeless and ancient. His eyes, bright, piercing white, were the same as mine, sharp and unyielding, yet they held an unsettling emptiness. His hair, grey and wispy like the sand beneath our feet, twisted into locks that swayed gently in the air as if moved by an invisible breeze. Timothy, standing beside me, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. He smiled slightly and asked, his voice tentative, "Is that the god of death?" I didn't turn to meet his gaze. Instead, I inclined my head ever so slightly in acknowledgement, a subtle nod. My focus remained fixed on the god before us, my heart heavy with the weight of his presence. Slowly, the god of the dead raised his hand, and a booming, rich laugh erupted from his chest. "Well, if it isn't Eden. I haven't seen you in so long, boy." His voice was warm, thick with a southern accent, inviting and unhurried, as if he were greeting an old friend. He motioned for us to come closer, an invitation we couldn't refuse, drawing us in as if we were magnetized. We obeyed, our footsteps slow but purposeful, walking alongside him as he regaled us with tales of lives long past. His voice wove stories of people who had once walked the earth, their lives and deaths intertwined with the very fabric of this place. But one story, one tale in particular, seized my attention, and I found myself hanging on every word he spoke. It was the tale of 6 children who had lived in Tennessee during a dark and painful time. One day, a boy, hungry, desperate for something sweet, stole a lollipop from a small store run by a white woman. The woman, feeling threatened, claimed the boy had held her at gunpoint. In a fury, her husband and a group of men stormed into the children's home, finding only the children, vulnerable and alone. They dragged them away, ignoring their cries, as they stuffed them into the trunk of their car like a sack of coal. They drove the children to a secluded hill, far from prying eyes, where the world would never see them again. As the god of the dead spoke, I could feel the weight of the story pressing down on me, a quiet sorrow that seemed to hang in the air, thick and oppressive. The cruelty was so palpable that it felt as if the very land itself mourned. Even now, I could feel the echo of those children's lost lives, their fate intertwined with the darkness that loomed over us. He began to softly recount where their bodies were laid to rest, and as he spoke, delicate petals sprouted from the ground beneath our feet, each one symbolizing a fragment of their innocence now forever entwined within the earth. From the outstretched hand of the god of death, a peculiar flower emerged, its striking appearance dominated by menacing spikes, encircling its base. Its roots were a deep azure, while the petals displayed an enchanting blend of black and purple. "Death is akin to this flower," he mused thoughtfully, "peaceful and silent on the surface, yet many are paralyzed by fear of the thorns that accompany it." He paused, allowing his words to linger in the air, the weight of his statement hanging between us. Yet it is only at the end of their journey that they come to realize that death is but a simple part of life. Turning to face us, a quiet smile broke across his face, and I found myself smiling back, captivated by the depth of his understanding. "Deceased," I remarked, I would argue you are the wisest of all gods." Timothy, however, continued to stare at the ground, seemingly unable to meet the gaze of the great deity before him. The god of death, keenly perceptive, noticed Timothy's discomfort and directed his eyes toward him. "Are you frightened, my boy?" he asked gently. Timothy, still avoiding eye contact, replied with a tremor in his voice. "You claim that death is a peaceful flower, but some of us do not desire peace. We crave chaos." The god of death stroked his beard in contemplation. "Indeed, you speak the truth. But remember, where there is rain, there is often a bow at the other end," he replied sagely. As we continued our walk, the deity seemed to engage more with our presence. Suddenly, he turned toward us and inquired, "What brings you two here?" Timothy glanced at me, a flicker of fear in his eyes, prompting me to respond. "We have come to bring a human boy back to life," I declared. The god of the dead turned his piercing gaze toward Timothy. "Is this boy your brother or your son Timothy?" he asked. For a fleeting moment, surprise flickered across Timothy's face. He shook his head, his voice cracking as he replied, "No. But how do you know my name is Timothy? I never told you." With a hearty laugh, the deity assured him, "You didn't need to. You simply possess the look of a Timothy." Then he continued, "However, I must caution you that reviving a human is a grave rule, one that is not meant to be broken. Eden, you are a dear friend to me, so I will not hinder your quest. But remember, there are consequences to bringing that boy back. He will not have a true form. He will exist as a ghost floating among the living." As he spoke, he abruptly pointed towards a glowing blue orb laying in the dust. "This is the boy you seek," he stated solemnly. The god of the dead then began to walk back toward his towering abode, raising a hand in farewell as we remained transfixed by the orb. Timothy stepped closer and tentatively reached out to touch it. "This is the boy's soul," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. I nodded, my gaze shifting back to him. "Yes, it is." Looking intently at me, he declared, "I have to give him a body." In that moment, doubts flooded my mind. What more could we possibly do? Yet, it surprised me immensely that Timothy was so focused on reviving this boy. If he had the power to bring back any human, even his beloved mother, why would he choose to restore this child instead? It felt as if Timothy sensed that this mother needed the boy's return to mend her broken heart, that giving her back her child would evoke joy in her life and perhaps ease his own pain. Kneeling beside Timothy, I placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The boy will merely become a ghost, Timothy. This won't heal her pain, it will only trap her in denial for the rest of her life," I said, my words penetrating his thoughts as I searched deep into his eyes for understanding. He turned away, seemingly attempting to dismiss the truth of my statement. His gaze landed on one of the faceless creatures that wandered around us. As their eyes locked, the creature began to replicate his features, mirroring his face with unsettling accuracy. "Timothy, have you lost your mind?" I exclaimed, alarmed. I knew he was unaware of the implications. These creatures possessed a dark power, capable of imitating a person's likeness in every detail, from their facial structure to their hair and even their voice. They would infiltrate the lives of the ones they mimicked, usurping homes, relationships, and identities, leaving the original stranded in this realm forever. In a sudden surge of determination, Timothy raised his hand and did something unexpected, something I never knew was even possible. Timothy remained suspended in the air, his eyes glowing with an intense, almost unnatural green light, his focus absolute. The energy around him crackled like a storm held just beneath the surface, ready to explode. It was clear that he was no longer the Timothy I once knew. There was something else in him now, something ancient and raw. His aura was like the flicker of a dying flame, yet vibrant with untapped power. The creature before him, once a faceless spectre, now writhed and shifted under his control, as if it were nothing more than clay in the hands of a master sculptor. With a wave of his hand, the air seemed to grow heavier, the shadows bending and twisting as if drawn to his will. He was commanding the very fabric of the creature's existence, pulling it, shaping it, carving out the features that had been stolen and replacing them with those of the boy, this innocent child whose life had been snuffed out prematurely. Every detail was perfect. The boy's delicate, rounded face, his tousled hair, the small but familiar scar above his eyebrow. It was uncanny, watching the creature's form shift, grow, and solidify into the image of a living boy. Timothy, still hovering above the ground, focused intently on the task, his hand reaching toward the creature as if cupping the very essence of life itself. He cautiously approached the creature, its eyes fixed on him with an intense curiosity. As he drew closer, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. With a steady hand, he took the vibrant blue orb, its surface shimmering under the light, and carefully positioned it near the creature's gaping mouth. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the orb inside, watching as it disappeared into the creature's jaws, lighting up the night in a dazzling, ethereal blue glow. The creature's body began to vibrate with life as its skin gradually took on the warmth of flesh, turning from pale grey to a soft, healthy hue. The faintest of breaths could be heard escaping its mouth, a subtle, telling sign that life was being infused into the form. When Timothy finally descended, his movements graceful, he cradled the now living creature in his arms. The boy's body, still somewhat ethereal in its fragility, felt warm and alive, yet not entirely real. The lines between life and death had blurred to the point of no return. Timothy's gaze was fixed on the boy, and for a moment, I could see the hope flicker in his eyes, a hope that this fragile resurrection might be the key to bringing peace to a broken mother's heart. He turned to face me, his expression solemn yet resolute, before glancing toward the mirror that stood in the shadows. The weight of the moment pressed heavily upon us as he spoke, his voice carrying a quiet, unwavering conviction. "This woman will have her child," he declared. I could hardly believe my ears, the weight of his words sinking in like stones in my chest as I levitated on my feet. I blinked in disbelief, staring at the boy in Timothy's arms, then back at Timothy himself. "You did all this for one woman? Why?" My voice caught, both incredulous and awestruck by the gravity of his decision. He didn't hesitate to answer. A soft smile curved his lips, one that seemed to hold a world of understanding and quiet sorrow. "Because that one smile will count for 1,000,000 more memories she will have with her son," Timothy said, his voice almost reverent. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of an eternity. There was no grandiose justification for his actions, no deep, philosophical reason other than that simple truth. A mother would get her son back, and that was enough for him. I looked down, feeling the stirrings of a smile tug at my lips despite the chaos that had unfolded. In that moment, I realized what Timothy had done and why. His actions, while morally ambiguous and fraught with peril, were not driven by selfishness. They were driven by an unwavering desire to give this grieving woman back a piece of her soul. It was the purity of his intention that struck me. In his eyes, I saw not a man seeking power or glory, but a man willing to risk everything for something as simple as a mother's prayer. Timothy was not a god. He was not a celestial being. He was a man, flawed and uncertain, who made decisions based on what he believed to be right, even if the consequences were unknown. There was a quiet beauty in that, a reminder of what it meant to be human. We crossed the threshold of the mirror world together, stepping back into the world of the living. The air outside was cold, and the moon hung high above us, casting an eerie glow over the quiet street. The house stood before us, silent and waiting, as if it too held its breath, uncertain of what was about to unfold. Inside, the mother sat slumped in her chair, her face hollow and marked by the passage of time. She had cried herself to sleep, her body betraying the exhaustion of a heart that had bled too many tears. Her cheeks, once wet with sorrow, were dry now, save for the faint remnants of old tears. Timothy gently laid the boy down on the cool concrete at the doorstep. He looked at the child one last time, his expression soft, before he stepped back and rang the bell. He walked to the street and turned around. We stood there, waiting, watching as the moments stretched between us like an eternity. And then, the door creaked open, just a crack. The mother peered out, her eyes clouded with confusion and disbelief. She took in the sight of her son, this small, sleeping boy lying on the doorstep, as if he had never been gone. Her breath caught in her throat, and her knees buckled as the reality of what she was seeing overwhelmed her. She sank to the ground, unable to hold herself up, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch her child. "Mommy!" the boy cried, his voice a pure, innocent note that rang through the still night. His eyes fluttered open, a smile spreading across his face as he looked up at her. The mother, overcome with emotion, let out a strangled laugh, a sound that was part joy, part disbelief, before she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as though afraid he might slip away. Tears flooded her eyes, but they were different now. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love that had been reignited. She looked up at us. "I don't know what you are or who you are," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "But thank you. Thank you for bringing my boy back to me." She reached out, her hands trembling as she clasped them together in silent thanks. Timothy stood there, his expression calm and unbothered. His head tilted slightly, and a soft smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "That's why I did it, Eden." As we turned to leave, I felt the weight of the night settling in. We crossed the threshold of our apartment once more, expecting the quiet peace of the evening to envelop us. But inside, there was a stranger waiting. She sat on our couch, her vibrant smile cutting through the room like a sharp beam of light. Her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders, and she wore a black leather jacket, her pale skin almost translucent in the low light. Timothy froze, confusion spreading across his face. "Who the hell is that?" he asked, his voice edged with incredulity. I placed a hand on my forehead, already bracing for the next unexpected twist of our lives. "The daughter of Hex," I said flatly, my patience thinning as I eyed the woman. She leaped off the couch with playful confidence, her movements quick and sure, as she approached Timothy and planted a kiss on his lips. She then turned to me, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "I've been looking for you, mister," she said, her voice carrying a heavy, insistent undertone. Timothy stood there, frozen in shock, his expression a mixture of bewilderment and frustration. I sighed deeply. "What is it now, Grace?" I asked, already anticipating the whirlwind that was about to sweep us away once more. "My mom kicked me out," she said, her voice playful yet tinged with vulnerability. And with that, the world seemed to spin further out of control.